Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Megan Messerly. It's Wednesday, June 25th.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. And there is so much news this morning, Megan.
There is so much news.
I feel like pretty much everyone in American politics was like sitting on their phone last night, just scrolling. But maybe it's been like that for the last 24 hours.
I was going to say, well, isn't this what we do every night? No, that's just me.
I mean, yeah, okay, fair enough. But especially last night, there's two big stories that we need to talk about this morning, Megan. The New York Democratic primary race last night produced a sensational result that some people had talked about maybe happening as an outside chance, and it is a growing impossibility. But we now know this morning that Zohran Mamdani has won the most votes in the first round of the Democratic mayoral primary in New York City. And we need to talk about that in just a second, because that is the thing that's got everybody buzzing in American politics today for a million different reasons. But we must not forget about the whole World War III thing, which is a pretty big story as well. President Trump is in The Hague today. He's been speaking over there this morning at the NATO Summit. He will be meeting with NATO leaders shortly. He will be giving a press conference in the next few hours. And of course, the backdrop to all of that is the ceasefire between Israel and Iran. And we'll get into that as well in a sec. Megan, it's not often you get such a big international story and such a big domestic story breaking out at the same time as we've had today.
Truly. I mean, it really has been, to your point, this massive news flood with just so many geopolitical implications and implications for domestic politics. It really is this fire hose of news information. But as journalists, this is what we love. This is what we live for.
You bet. And this is what we're going to condense for you guys in just about 15 minutes time in total. I should just mention before we get into those two main stories, the third thing, do keep your eyes still on Capitol Hill. We say it every day, but the Senate Republicans are hammering out major policy decisions that are going to go into this piece of legislation, which is going to have a massive impact on people's lives right across America. They are fighting over tax cuts, and they are not quite making the numbers add up yet. But my expectation is that they will get somewhere by the end of the week where they have a vote. Let's focus first of all on the big story that everyone was watching last night, which was this Democratic primary race in New York City. The man of the moment, Zohran Mamdani, he started, as I say, as an outsider. He's finished first in the first round of voting in the Democratic primary. He is the overwhelming favorite now to be the Democratic nominee come the actual election in November. And New York being what it is, he will be the overwhelming favorite, I think, to win that election as well. And we could be seeing a rise of a very interesting political figure right now, Megan. This guy is 33 years old. If he wins in November, he will be the youngest mayor of New York in something like 140 years. He will be the city's first Muslim mayor. But above all, and most importantly, he is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. That puts him in a pretty different place to most of the mainstream politicians we see around the country. And it's just a real shockwave for the Democratic Party.
It really is. It comes at just such a pivotal moment for the Democratic Party across the United States, right? The party has really been licking its wounds and doing a lot of soul searching about what its path forward looks like in the wake of the really crushing election that we saw in November. And this is obviously not a new phenomenon. The Democratic Party has been grappling with this for a long time. But I mean, what this ultimately comes down to is it going to sort of be the Democratic Party of the past? Think about the support that Andrew Cuomo had in this race, the sums behind him, the donors behind him, the traditional voting blocks and endorsers backing him, right? That a lot of folks see as sort of representative of this traditional model of how you run a Democratic campaign and what it means to be a Democratic candidate. And then you have Mamdani, who's young. He's a Democratic socialist, upstart political figure. To your point, yes, folks comparing him to Barack Obama in terms of the way he speaks and campaigns and sort of has this ability to inspire, but two vastly different visions for the future of the Democratic Party. And so we're seeing a microcosm of this play out in New York City. But I think what folks are watching is what the broader impact on American politics is going to be.
You bet. People listening to this who don't live in New York City might be thinking, why do I care who wins the Democratic nomination to be the mayor of New York? There's a few reasons why this really matters. And Megan, you're completely right. The future of the Democratic Party. I mean, you couldn't have come up with two more candidates at either end of the spectrum if you tried, right? I mean, Andrew Cuomo was, of course, the governor of New York, resigned in disgrace. He is the embodiment of old establishment figure, right? You couldn't have dreamed up
Absolutely.
a better establishment figure if you'd wanted to. Mamdani, this young guy no one's ever heard of, for so many reasons, is just a complete outside candidate. I mean, you compare him to Barack Obama, and I do get the point in terms of the energy, ability to connect with young people. But different from Barack Obama, he's really left wing. Like,
Yes.
you look at his policy platform, it's free buses, it's free childcare, it's city-run grocery stores. Whether these things are actually going to happen under his leadership, I have no idea, but these are not Barack Obama friendly policies, right?
No, they are not.
He is completely different. Now, does it mean that the Democratic Party has suddenly decided it wants to be a much, much more left-wing party? There will certainly be people in the Democratic Party who want to tell you that we've got to approach things differently, that we need a much more radical platform. Equally, how many elections do we have to see where if you put up the candidate who is clearly the establishment candidate, they always get beat? I mean, it just happens every single time, right? And so you sort of have to think about the fact that it's hard to pick a worse candidate than someone like Andrew Cuomo in the current climate where people just want change. They just want to smash the establishment figures and find something new. And we've seen it again and again and again. And it feels to me, that that's exactly what we've seen in New York City.
Exactly. And I heard it when I was out on the campaign trail last year, following around Kamala Harris. Obviously, there was a lot of support for her, but she was a very, establishment candidate, right? And you talk to sort of young Gen Z voters, and they were sort of inspired by her and her profile, but they really are looking for someone who's a bit more on the outside, right? And that's the foil to exactly what we've seen happen on the right, which is why you see these young Gen Z Republican voters being drawn to sort of the folks who are going to be a bit outside of the norm, say the things that no one else says, right? That's what's appealing to the next generation of voters. And I think that's exactly what we saw Mamdani capitalize on here.
You bet. And also just campaigning in a much more modern way. He's all viral media clips. He's performing with influencers versus someone like Andrew Cuomo, who is the exact opposite approach to campaigning. It's all big money, it's union endorsements, it's TV ads. Does that stuff still work? Well, it didn't work yesterday in New York City, and there might be quite a lot of lessons there for the Democrats as they think ahead to 2026 and especially to 2028 about how you connect with voters.
Absolutely. Well, and the thing I think about too, and time will tell how this sort of plays out, you've had Republicans for years attacking Democrats, these like relatively establishment, not super far left Democrats, as socialists, right? And here you have someone who actually identifies as a socialist. And so what will that mean for Mamdani if he becomes this image of the Democratic Party? What does that mean for Republicans, for Trump, for the MAGA coalition attacking him? On one hand, Republicans have been using this attack for years. So does it carry any weight, or do folks say, okay, you've been saying socialist for years, whatever? Or does it really resonate with folks to say, here's someone who is advocating for these policies, and is it too far left for some voters? Or does it sort of capture the imagination of voters on the left in the way that we haven't seen Democrats do in that kind of way for a long, long time?
My guess is that right now the Republicans are rubbing their hands at the prospect of a new boogeyman that they can paint. Look, they're all radical leftists. But as you say, who knows? We better talk about the other big story that is gripping the world, because President Trump, as we know, is in the Netherlands today. He's at the annual NATO Summit in The Hague. He's gone there to talk about defense spending, as we were saying on the podcast yesterday. But of course, he can't leave the Iran-Israel story behind. And this huge story broke yesterday afternoon. CNN were the first ones to get their hands on it, but it's been confirmed by numerous other outlets now that a preliminary defense intelligence report by the United States government concluded that, in fact, those obliterating, incredible airstrikes we saw at the weekend probably only did a few months' damage to the nuclear program of Iran, which is a very different picture to the one, of course, that Donald Trump and his administration have been telling us. I mean, they've been pushing back very hard from the White House about this report, but the report exists. They're not saying it's not a real thing. Megan, how worried do you think they are about the way this is suddenly playing out for them?
I mean, I'm of two minds about this. On one hand, yes, they're acknowledging this is a real report. They're not pushing back on that, but they are saying that this information was released by a low-level staffer. We saw White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt come out very forcefully in response to those early news reports. The president himself got involved in the fray overnight on Truth Social, going back to his favorite attack against the media, CNN and the failing New York Times, his sort of favorite catchphrases from the trail and from his first campaign. And so I think what we're really seeing is this effort by the administration to discredit this report. They're standing by their statements that this was a total victory and obliteration and what have you. So I think there's a couple of things going on here. I mean, one, they're standing by their message. They need to telegraph to the Republican base that this was a success. We've seen a lot of back and forth over the last 48, 72 hours. There's been a lot of discontent within the base about the direction the president has been taking the administration on foreign policy. And so for a lot of political reasons, the administration needs this to be a success. So they're going to be sticking by that messaging at all costs. But like you were mentioning, he's showing up in the Netherlands with world leaders, right? He needs to enter those conversations from a position of strength. Talking to experts here in the national security space and the foreign policy space, they've sort of always known this is going to be a longer term conversation, right? The president might declare immediate victory, but it's going to take some time to get a real understanding of the situation on the ground, what Iran's nuclear capabilities are going to be moving forward. So as much as the president has been, declaring victory, pushing these reports to the side and trying to move beyond all of this issue certainly is not leaving him.
No way, it's definitely not. And, we've had pretty much everyone in the administration come out last night to discredit their own intelligence agency's report. I was watching Pete Hegseth do it. I was watching Steve Witkoff, the envoy, doing it. Trump himself, as he said, did it on Truth Social, all just saying, yeah, that's not true. We obviously obliterated it because the bombs were massive. Did you see how massive the bombs were? And it's like, yeah, we did, but it's underground. And, the pictures, as we've said it on the podcast all week, do not clearly show anything. It might have obliterated what's many hundreds of feet beneath that mountain, or it might not have done, but we don't know. This report is being cast as sort of low certainty in itself. They're not really sure. But it does matter an awful lot because Donald Trump has been claiming this as a huge success this week. And with some justification, many of the things that people warned about didn't happen in terms of how wrong this could go. But the whole point of it was to set back Iran's nuclear capabilities years, if not permanently. If all it really did was set it back a few months, then it really does make you rethink the whole thing about how good an idea it obviously was. And so I guess they'll just keep telling us today, and Donald Trump, who has a press conference in The Hague in the next few hours, sort of mid-morning DC time, will no doubt be telling us again, no, huge bombs definitely worked. We won't know for sure. He won't know for sure. We'll only really know for sure in a few months or a few years when we see what Iran came back and did.
Absolutely.
We should just very briefly talk about defense spending before we finish, Megan, because that is the other big announcement that's being made in The Hague today. And it is a really big deal that Donald Trump has pushed European leaders into this point where they are announcing 5% of their GDP will be spent on defense over the next 10 years. That's a massive win for the president, and he will be touting that as such this morning. He'll also be meeting President Zelensky, we believe, of Ukraine, the guy he ditched last week in Canada. But it just feels like, all of the momentum and the impetus behind that push for some sort of peace or some sort of outcome in Ukraine that President Trump came in with really feels like it's ebbed away now.
It really does. It feels like it's fizzled out from that now infamous Oval Office meeting between the president and President Zelensky. And you just think about how much time has passed since then and how little progress has been made. So even while you're seeing all these massive commitments on defense spending from European countries, as Europe remains fixated on the war between Russia and Ukraine, the president just seems increasingly disinterested in Europe as there's just other priorities on the top of his mind.
Exactly. And as all of this goes on, cities like Kyiv keep getting bombed night after night in residential areas. And, the world is no longer talking about it. We try and end the show on something more lighthearted than bombing. Let's try and do that. We did your birthday yesterday, Megan. I hope you had a nice day.
Thank you, I did.
I've got somebody else's today, the Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor's birthday. There you go. That's someone nearly as important as yourself celebrating this week as well. Big shout out to her on a very hot day. All right, that's all we've got time for on today's show. As always, we record this podcast a couple of hours before it actually comes out. If you want the very, very latest news on what's been happening in The Hague this morning, do read the Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/campaign. Playbook. And we'll be back tomorrow. Have a great Wednesday.